know about you, but I was so dissociated and numb. Like I could not feel a sensation in my body until, the recent few years. I've been really deep in somatic work. You couldn't tell me where my left toes were. Like, honestly, I was so disconnected from my body. I was like, what does being in my body even mean? And it would frustrate me when people tell me to just relax or calm down. And I lived in such a disassociated state, whether that was through, sympathetic activation and chronic overwhelm or complete disassociation, shame, and shutdown. And that is what that dopamine reward system sort of mirrored, that highs and then the crash. And that was so familiar to my nervous system. And it wasn't until I really started studying and understanding and training in the neurobiology of addiction that I understood my nervous system was seriously just doing what it could to survive and what it knew and what it was so familiar, like mirrored from my childhood experiences.
The question is never why the addiction, but why the pain. That's a quote from Dr. Gabor Mate. And in this episode, we're really looking at addiction as not a moral failing, but as a response to suffering, a nervous system adaptation, a neurochemical loop that starts in chronic dysregulation and pain, whether that's physical or emotional. It's an output that often leads us then to social isolation. It can compound our trauma, and it can lead to physical health issues. In this episode, we're going to dive deep into the neurobiology of addiction, the reward circuitry of the brain, and how trauma shapes our pathways of pleasure and pain. And we're joined today by a dear friend of ours and an incredible somatic practitioner who has really stood on both sides of this story. Brooke Wolfe is a somatic voice coach, a former addiction recovery coach, and someone who helps people reclaim their authentic voice, literally and metaphorically.
This episode is part of a powerful season where we're examining the mental and physical health outputs of trauma through a neurosomatic lens, revealing how deeply our biology, behaviors, and emotional patterns are intertwined. Addiction is not just a chemical dependency, but a nervous system adaptation, and understanding this helps us shift from shame into empowered healing. Welcome to Trauma Rewired, the podcast that teaches you about your nervous system, how trauma lives in the body, and what you can do to heal. I'm your co-host, Jennifer Wallace. I'm a neurosomatic psychedelic preparation and integration guide, and I bring your nervous system into peak somatic experiences. And I'm also one of the educators at the Neurosomatic Intelligence Coaching Certification.
And I'm your co-host, Elizabeth Kristoff, founder of BrainBase.com, an online community where we use applied neurology, somatics, nervous system regulation tools to process stress, increase capacity, and improve resilience. And I'm also the founder of the Neurosomatic Intelligence Coaching Certification, an ICF-accredited course for coaches, therapists, practitioners to really bring the nervous system in as a foundation of all of the good work that you do. And again, I'm so excited today to introduce Brooke. She has not only worked on the front lines of addiction in recovery centers, but she's also led Jen and I through profound healing experiences using somatic voice activation. It's really opened up a whole new portal of working somatically for me in a way that's so much more fun. And I'm just excited to have you here and to dive into all of this. And before we get going on this episode, I'd love for you to introduce yourself and tell us some parts of your story that are really relevant to the conversation today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jennifer and Elizabeth. I'm so happy to be here. And as always, for diving into such a complex and necessary topic. As a somatic practitioner and a former addiction recovery coach, this is such a tender topic for me, not only for my own personal experience, but for also many clients that I've worked with. I've spent the last decade working in addiction treatment facilities. I've worked in inpatient detox residential facilities, outpatient facilities, all levels of care from adolescents to adults. I worked in dual diagnosis, eating disorder, and mental health treatments. And I'm telling you, this addiction does not discriminate. Anyone can be on this journey. And it's just such a powerful topic. And, as most of us, my own body of work is inspired by my own lived experience healing from addiction. I, from ages 15 to 19, struggled deeply, escalated to a heroin and methamphetamine addiction. And by the time I was 19, I found myself in a rehabilitation facility, and that absolutely transformed my life. Nearly overnight, I experienced intense change. However, the lasting sustainable change at the level of the nervous system really didn't happen until I started getting into somatic work. And that was finding out the root of the pain that was driving my addiction, that was driving my nervous system's desire to self-regulate through substances, was a deeper issue of complex trauma and attachment wounding and my own high ACE scores. And so really understanding that my addiction did help me survive and get through a really challenging time in my life, but it stopped working and I had to find other tools that met that same need. And so it's been such a life-changing, transformative journey that there's always a new layer unraveling for my addiction recovery. It's so much more than just removing the substance from your life, but your relationship with all of life and how you relate to life and the people and every behavior and every substance, everything that you put in your body and everything that you come into contact with. And I just feel so grateful to be here. I'm super excited to dive into this topic. And I also want to just acknowledge and recognize and thank everyone who is curious and courageous enough to explore this realm of addiction. I have lost so many clients and friends and family members to addiction. My brother passed away 3 years ago this week to addiction. And it is just such a tender topic. And I want to bring that forward because there's also so much liberation. I've seen hundreds of people find just these jaw-dropping, transformational, life-changing experiences through healing from addiction. And healing and so much hope is possible, and it happens at the level of the nervous system. And this really is it. And so I'm super excited to dive into this topic. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. I mean, thank you for all that you've shared with us and our listeners too. I mean, you have such a profound wisdom that comes from within, not just from your education, but from your lived experience. And as I uncouple from a cannabis addiction, like being supported by you during this time, it just could not have lined up more synchronistically divine for me in this moment. So I'm really looking forward to sharing you with our listener, because addiction is an adaptation. It's not a weakness. And addiction, when viewed through the lens of neurosomatic intelligence, or viewed through the neurosomatic lens, is the nervous system's attempt to self-regulate in the face of chronic dysregulation, unresolved trauma, and internal chaos. It's not about weakness, or it's not about lack of willpower. It's a biological strategy for relief when safety and regulation feel out of reach. And if you've been following Trauma Rewired for a while, you know that Elizabeth and I have shared incredibly openly about our food addictions and how we view food. There's actually 10 episodes that come before this one that have to do with food. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time there, but binge eating and cycles of restriction definitely play a role in all of our lives, the three of us here. And now, and I have spoken openly about my use of cannabis, but now I am uncoupling myself from this cannabis and really understanding how it has been a dampener, how it's been a protector, how it has saved me. And for 33 years, I have been using and misusing this medicine. And even alcohol, we've been pretty open with here too. And all of these substances, they're all just coming in to help solve a problem and give us relief from the chronic dysregulation. And when I think about the cannabis addiction that I am coming out from, so much of it does feel emotional. Like it's tied up into emotional trauma, dysregulation, fear of women and women's circles and spaces, and isolation. It just really kept me hiding and really kept me from experiencing my life and having to face what I refer to as overwhelm, right? And we talk openly a lot about overwhelm, and I thought I was overwhelmed. And now it's like, it's a waking up to my life as we sit here today to record. I'm only on day 13 of cold turkey. So it's a journey, and I'm sure we're going to explore that a little bit more.
Yes, gosh, thank you both for sharing so openly, and Brooke for also highlighting what a portal addiction can be to transformation, to higher levels of consciousness, to healing generational trauma patterns that are moving through our family lines. And that in some ways it can be our gift, right? And Jen, for the way that you talked about that root of emotional dysregulation that is underneath there. And that's what I was really thinking about when we were talking about, it being an adaptation, not a weakness. And I think back to my adolescent self, flailing through the world, just so dysregulated, so in so much internal chaos and so much internal pain. And I just needed a break. I needed a relief for that. I needed some kind of pressure valve to release. And so, I've had all kinds of struggles with addiction, from alcohol to cocaine to food, like Jen mentioned, that we talk about on here a lot. And at the root of that, I can see the emotional dysregulation, the way that my nervous system was patterned to chronically repress emotions and to not have the skill to be able to process and articulate and move through that emotional experience, and how much stress that caused my system, and the relational components to that as well that you were talking about, Brooke, the attachment patterns. And I think I see this loop as we talk about this, where we have some kind of emotional trigger, right? It could be an emotional flashback, or there's some thing that constructs an emotional experience in our nervous system, in our brain, from the sensory stimulus that's coming in. And so we start to experience all the sensations of that emotion, including the thoughts that come with that, the internal physical sensations, the physiological responses, and then that creates a craving for relief of some sort. And so much of the time we find that in a behavior or a substance, and that will offer a short-term solution, but then it leads to deeper dysregulation a lot of the time, whether that's overeating or using a substance, drinking alcohol, cannabis, whatever. And then that compounds with more emotional experience, right? Like shame, or the situations that we end up putting ourselves in, the boundaries that we violate. And so the stress load gets higher, and then we're stuck in this loop of, now there's more trauma, more stress, more emotions to process. We don't have the skill. We go back to using the substance. That creates more. And it's just this ongoing cycle.
Yeah, thank you so much, Elizabeth, for just highlighting that vicious cycle of addiction that does give us this immediate relief. It works. And eventually it does perpetuate more overwhelm, more dysregulation. And it's like, I imagine it like digging us in this like deep hole that we don't even realize we're digging ourselves into. And we don't realize how deep we are, of like, overriding the needs of our body, or crossing our own boundaries, or not even knowing what boundaries are. And just eventually we get into this kind of in between a rock and a hard place, and we don't know how to get out because we've been doing it for so long. And it's just such a journey. And thank you, Jennifer and Elizabeth, both, for just your courage and humility always, for sharing your own journey. I love that we can come here together as practitioners and space holders, and also honor that, yes, we're still on our own ever evolving journey of healing and transformation. And I think that's so important too, because I got clean when I was 19, but then there was an eating disorder. Then there was alcoholism. Then there was relationships and codependency. There was like layer and layer. And I was like, whoa, there's more. Whoa, there's more. And it really is this getting to the root that exists in the nervous system. And it's so powerful, and really understanding and resolving trauma on a nervous system level, and understanding how trauma will alter our brain development. It will alter our ability to make decisions. I mean, from reshaping our stress response system, the HPA axis, enlarging our amygdala, that fear center, switching off our prefrontal cortex, like our ability to make decisions as teenagers. I feel like that's when so many of our addictions first kind of start coming online, when we're developing an identity and a sense of self and our place in the world and our community and our tribe and at school. And we start developing more protective strategies because we're emerging out of that vulnerable, more inner child part of our life and into, okay, layers of protection and the masks that we wear to feel safe in the world. And so trauma will leave us more predisposed to addiction, even dysregulating our dopamine reward system. So I know, Jennifer, you guys are going to get more into that, but the good news is this can all be repatterned through somatic and nervous system based tools, like the ability to rewire and repattern. I'm constantly in awe. I have seen it over and over and over again. A deeply worn neural pathway to pick up that drink, and then you make a different choice one day at a time, and you repattern that one tiny habit at a time. And it's so possible. And I've done it myself over and over again, and I've seen thousands of people do it, and it truly is incredible. And I think it's really important that we ask ourselves, what need is this substance or behavior meeting? And how can I get this need met in a supportive and sustainable way? Like, that's the key here. And when I first got clean, I discovered that outer shell, that deeply layered pattern of self-abandoning, of numbing out, of compulsive coping for my own survival. This happened for me, like I've told you guys, through food, relationships, overworking, hyperproductivity cycles, feeling safe by doing things, right? Constantly people pleasing. I was just constantly trying to self-soothe, to control my outer experience because I felt so chaotic and out of control of these suppressed emotions and everything that I stuffed down that was like compounded over years and years of my life. And it was like just bubbling up to the surface. And I couldn't go deep into it all at once. It was too overwhelming. And that's what I find so many healing journeys and so many practitioners will be like, well, just feel it to heal in and go to the root. It's way too much. You can't dive into that pool. One layer, titrating into it, layer by layer at a time, easing with lots of somatic resourcing and safety, which I know we'll get into shortly. But it really is, if we had never had access to things like co-regulation, emotional attunement, somatic safety, just feeling safe, alive, and free in our body at all, then we're just going to reach for what is available.
Absolutely. And remembering that neuroplastic component of being a human, that we can repattern, but it has to be at the pace that we can positively adapt to. And I used to work with someone for my addictions that would say, like, we deal with the one that's most likely to kill us first, like one step at a time, right? And then we get to these deeper layers because we talk in here a lot about everything being a skill, and every skill is trainable. And our addictions, our behaviors, they are skills that we have learned. There is a huge component of those addictions that were really life-saving. I don't know that I would be here if I didn't have that to help me cope with the world and my past experiences. And as I'm moving through those cycles of addiction, I am creating further deficits in my nervous system, more deficits in my interoceptive system, my ability to feel and accurately interpret those signals, more chronic dysregulation. And so there's this balance between, yes, I need it to stay alive, and also it's compounding on itself. And so, we've talked about that chronic dysregulation and the high stress load that drives addiction, but I do want to dive a little bit into the reward circuitry component of this, because I think that's a key component to understanding addiction, how our reward circuitry works. And so our reward circuit in the brain is known as our mesolimbic pathway. And that's a network that begins in the ventral tegmental area. You can call it the VTA for short. And it's a dopamine producing region in the midbrain. And then that dopamine travels to different structures in your brain: nucleus accumbens, prefrontal cortex. These are areas that are responsible for our experience of motivation, of reward, that drive our decision making. And so when we engage in behaviors that were at one point there for the proliferation of our species, right? Eating high calorie, glucose rich foods, connecting socially, sexual activity, reproduction, moving our bodies. This pathway lights up, right? It's there to drive those behaviors that are life sustaining for the human species. And we get a release of dopamine and it reinforces those actions. And there are substances like drugs or alcohol or even high sugar foods that will flood this system with unnaturally high levels of dopamine. And then we get this big spike, and then that's followed by a dip in our dopamine. It's called the opponent process reaction. So you can kind of think of it as a jagged graph line that goes downward. So we get this big spike, but then our body's trying to maintain homeostasis, so we plummet down. And then to get back to that baseline, we need more of the substance that creates dopamine, right? So after engaging in a substance that spikes our dopamine, we experience the craving for more of it. And that's our brain's attempt to return to homeostasis. And we feel in those moments where we're dipping down really depleted, right? And so we crave more of that just to escape. And then over time, our brain becomes desensitized and it starts producing less dopamine. And you can even have a reduction in the number of dopamine receptors available to absorb dopamine because we're always adapting to what we do. And so as a result of that, we experience less pleasure, less joy, less motivation in our life. We feel more emotionally flat. It's like you're playing your favorite song, and normally you would have this experience with it, you know, the joy, the excitement. It's like the song is on, but the volume is just turned down, right? It's just background music and you don't get that same experience. And a great read, if you're interested in all of this, is Dopamine Nation by Dr. Anna Lembke. And that really breaks down a lot of this and how our society really drives a lot of this dysregulation in our dopamine systems. And that in order to recalibrate, we have to have some time where we're not engaging in those behaviors that really spike the dopamine. And one more thing to think about in that is that chronic stress also depletes our dopamine. So if we're in chronic stress because of our developmental trauma or because of our lifestyle or those cycles of overworking or relational stress, that also is going to lead to that same depletion and eventually less dopamine receptors and lead us to be more in a primed state for developing an addictive relationship to something.
It's crucial to understand that trauma, especially during our formative years, it can profoundly disrupt our brain's dopamine system. And research indicates that individuals exposed to chronic adversity may experience diminished capacity to produce dopamine in response to stress, impairing their ability to cope with challenging situations. The dampened dopamine production not only affects our mood and motivation, but also increases susceptibility to mental health issues and addictive behaviors. Essentially, when our natural reward system is compromised by trauma, we may seek external substances or behaviors to compensate for that deficit, perpetuating a cycle of dependency and further dysregulation. And Elizabeth, it really hit me when you said about your mentor that you would start with the addiction that would kill you first. So for me, it was food. Cannabis got me through a food addiction, believe it or not, when most people kind of find that hard to believe, the connection of food and cannabis, but then it was alcohol. And so it seems natural that cannabis would be my final frontier. And what I have learned recently is that cannabis has a really masculine energy for me. And we know that dopamine is the neurotransmitter that is dominant in the male nervous system, whereas the female nervous system, that neurotransmitter is oxytocin, the connection driver. And so having the connection for me that cannabis had a masculine energy because it was keeping me in the doing. It was keeping me in the action of work, in the action of relationship, in the action of conversation. Like it was a driver for me. And so hearing these connections about dysregulation, chronic stress dysregulation from development, weakening the dopamine system, it's like, wow, that just feels like it's just a light bulb moment. I don't know if anybody else listening can really relate to that experience, but it was just a major stress relief for me to work with cannabis or alcohol or whatever it was. But I'm just going to keep my focus personally on cannabis today, since that is what is is the vortex I'm living in Trauma Rewired right now. And, you know, I have questioned the word homeostasis so much on this podcast because the homeostasis of my little system in development, it was not, my system was wired for stress and survival. So my homeostasis points are high stress points, not regulation points. And so I just find that really interesting as a connection.
Hey guys, before we dive deeper into this conversation, I want to take a moment to share something really special. I've partnered with Brooke to create a brand new offering, the Neurosomatic Voice Activation course.
This is a 7-week live experience of 7 90-minute sessions with Elizabeth and Brooke, where you'll learn to explore how your voice can become a powerful tool for nervous system regulation, emotional release, and authentic expression. It's an incredible opportunity to experience how your own voice can become a tool for regulation, expression, and healing. Brooke's somatic voice work changed so much for me personally. It helped me connect with my body, set boundaries more clearly, and express emotions in a whole new way. A fun, creative, and exciting way.
Yeah, me too. And you'll get access to guided vocal practices, neurosomatic tools, and all of the replays with lifetime access to everything. This work is so playful, embodied, and of course, rooted in neuroscience. It's about reconnecting to your voice as a pathway to healing and wholeness.
If your voice has ever felt stuck, shut down, or shaped by perfectionism or people pleasing, this course is for you. It's not about performing. It's about coming home to yourself through your sound.
We start June 3rd. Go to brookewolfe.com/trauma rewired and get 20% off the registration price. So that is Brooke Wolfe, BROOKEWOLFE.com/trauma rewired for 20% off.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for just you mirroring the relationship with cannabis to be more of a masculine energy. And I so relate to that with just how different addictions of mine manifested over the years. You know, when I was 15, I left my childhood home and I was separated from my mother and my brother and my sister, who I did not see, you know, for many, many years. And this is when my relationship with heroin just like took all, like in a matter of 6 months, you guys. It was so fast. I was so young. That is like the immediate oxytocin overload, the love and the connection of the mother that I was separated from. And then very shortly after that, it was alcohol. And I was living, just with my dad. And we had a really tumultuous relationship trying to figure out how to exist with each other when we both had, complex trauma and just just came out of a really chaotic home environment and a divorce situation. And it was so challenging. And I realized too, when I recovered from my alcoholism, it was so much of my relationships with men and the way that I related in my solar plexus to this energy of control and hyperproductivity. And I would go into these cycles of overworking and constantly overdoing. And then I would just like binge drink and black out on the weekends. And then I'd go back to do and just constantly work. And then just that constant high and low and that intensity that our addiction sort of perpetuates within our nervous system, that's kind of mirroring our, for me, my more anxious avoidant attachment style too, of like all or nothing, black or white. It's what we reach for really is a mirror for our inner environment and what it is we're looking to integrate. And if we can pinpoint what it is we need to integrate, then there's just so much healing there and so much relief, right? Because trauma is wiring us to seek relief over reward. And so it's not so much about like chasing pleasure always, but it is about escaping pain. It's more about escaping pain. And I don't know about you, but I was so dissociated and numb. Like I could not feel a sensation in my body until, the recent few years I've been really deep in somatic work. but you couldn't tell me where my left toes were. Like, honestly, I was so disconnected from my body. I was like, what does being in my body even mean? And it would frustrate me when people would tell me to just relax or calm down. And I lived in such a disassociated state, whether that was through, sympathetic activation and chronic overwhelm, or complete disassociation, shame, and shutdown. And that is what that dopamine reward system sort of mirrored, that highs and then the crash. And that was so familiar to my nervous system. And it wasn't until I really started studying and understanding and training in the neurobiology of addiction that I understood my nervous system was seriously just doing what it could to survive, and what it knew and what it was so familiar, like mirrored from my childhood experiences.
Yes, that idea that Jen has brought up on here many times, like what homeostasis are we returning to, right? That chronic dysregulation is sometimes the homeostatic set point that we are developing with. And so we have to really intentionally train that skill of modulation. I think this topic is so layered because we have the chronic dysregulation, we have the interoceptive deficits and the inability to feel and process our internal sensations. We have the dopamine reward center. And then I'm so glad that you guys touched on oxytocin too, because I was thinking about that a lot as I was preparing for this episode and the recent episode we had with Veronica Rotman on the female nervous system, and how oxytocin is more of a driver for reward and behavior in the female nervous system. And the really interesting thing about oxytocin is it's both a hormone and a neurotransmitter. And so as a neurotransmitter, it's produced in the hypothalamus and it's released to different brain regions, and creates that communication between our neurons. And in that way, it's helping us to process in the brain, regulating different emotional states and social behaviors and social bonding. And as a hormone, it's secreted into the bloodstream through the pituitary gland, and it influences our body really broadly, like in preparation for childbirth or lactation, or the somatic stress regulation in the body, right? And both of these systems for oxytocin are modulating safety at that neurological level, especially social safety and our capacity to connect and co-regulate with other people. It's often referred to as the connection chemical. And so I think understanding that and understanding the way that also motivates and influences behavior, especially social patterns, right? And we can look at all kinds of different addictions here, love addiction, relational patterns, and how oxytocin is also a huge driver there, and the ways that we are disrupted in that oxytocin system as well, especially during development when our attachment needs are not met, like the situation that you were describing, Brooke, and many of us with CPTS, right? This is an attachment wound at the root. And so there's a lot of dysregulation there that we're seeking to modulate through substance.
And I'm so glad that Brooke brought up that all or nothing pattern, because that is so relatable to an addiction and to relational stress. It's like when you were talking about the pattern of like control, overdrive, shutdown. Control, overdrive, shutdown is just constant. And I want to speak too about interoceptive deficits, because I have an interoceptive deficit, but it's not because I can't feel anything. I have high interoceptive awareness, which is a deficit because I can feel everything in my body. I wasn't using cannabis, which cannabis can be a really great medicine for people who want to feel into their bodies, right? Who can't feel. But for me, I could already feel everything. And that's the deficit. It's not accurate, right? Whether your deficit is high or low, we are going for accuracy always. And so now it's about retraining my system and getting into my body in a different way and learning to orient actually with my external environment, which is something that Brooke opened my eyes to. Like, stop shutting your eyes to meditate and go into your body. You don't need to do that. And that was a really breakthrough for me, honestly, Brooke.
Thank you so much for sharing about that. I have chills because I remember that breakthrough moment. And I so relate to that experience of just being hyper attuned and hyper aware to the sensitivity in your body, because I have both sides, the black and the white. I'm either like not in my body, so disconnected. And now I realized, oh, I actually was disassociated and disconnected because I'm actually so sensitive. And I'm actually so hyper aware of everything my body's experiencing all the time. And I find this especially true for people that have been on a healing journey for a while. They really know what their body needs. They've had to go through a lot of maybe health issues or chronic pain or autoimmune issues. And they are hyper attuned to, my body needs this supplement or this food or this ritual, that sometimes there's an overwhelm with just imagining connecting to your body, because it's like, well, it needs this, that then we're taken out of the beingness of our body and into a state of doing to solve this problem, because oftentimes we meet our body as this problem to be solved instead of this mystery to be experienced, right? Because the subconscious inner world is a mystery. There's so much unknown and unseen hidden wisdom, and building that trust and that safety is honestly key. And doing that through co-regulation, through external resourcing. We have such a hyper individualist healing culture that's trying to always go inward, always do things alone. And addiction is such an isolating experience on its own, that we're already cutting off from the world and usually not making social contact. And instead of reaching out to call a friend, we're picking up the cannabis or taking a drink instead, or whatever it is that you're doing, which normally you would seek connection, but instead we're seeking connection through the substance or seeking disconnection, whatever it is. But ultimately we're all desiring that connection. We're biologically wired for it. And especially as women, for thousands of years, we've been healing and coming together in community and circle, to pray, to celebrate, to grieve, to bleed together, to have babies together. And that is such a natural part of who we are. And so reclaiming that community aspect is essential for addiction recovery, which I know we'll get into more shortly. So
Yeah, I could not do this without the tools. Without NSI as the foundation and having tools. You brought this up earlier, Elizabeth, like all these layers and these, like without tools and without support, there would be no mountain. I could not climb the mountain on my own.
Yeah, 100%. And I just want to highlight, and I think, Brooke, what you were talking about connection and community and using substance to find that connection, and then also having it isolate us more, is such an important thing. But I want to jump back to what Jen was saying about the interoceptive system. And sometimes what that looks like is being overwhelmed by the sensory of our interoceptive system, because I do think there's so much talk about the importance of interoceptive awareness and feeling into our bodies, but especially when we think about different types of neurodivergent identities, just the way that different people's brains interpret sensations, I really find that there is just as much of people there's too much flooding of information from the interoceptive system. There's not enough regulation of that by the thalamus to the prefrontal cortex about what is making it up to our conscious awareness. And there's also interoceptive inaccuracy, too much threat associated to those sensations. And so that can be incredibly overwhelming for a system. And then we need substance to blanket out those sensations because it's too much. And then if I'm asking my clients to keep dropping deeper and deeper into the body and become more fixated, more hyper aware of those sensations, I'm also furthering that dysregulation.
Thank you so much for taking the moment to explain that. It's really important. And I think another important thing for us to talk about is ACE scores, because we know there's a link between adverse childhood experiences and addiction, because studies show that 80% of individuals with a substance use disorder report at least one ACE score. And so we've talked on here many times, we have higher ACE scores. And these early life stressors, they don't just create emotional wounds, they alter the architecture of our developing brains, Chronic exposure to stress during critical development windows affect the relationship between the limbic system, the prefrontal cortex, and the interoceptive system. It sensitizes the amygdala, and it makes it more difficult to regulate emotion and impulse control. So in other words, the body and brain adapt to survive, often wiring for hypervigilance, emotional overwhelm, and an increased drive to escape discomfort. And so as a result, the nervous system becomes primed to seek external sources of regulation. Substances, addictive behaviors, or even relational patterns, they can serve as quick fixes to temporarily soothe an overactive stress response. But these coping mechanisms are not chosen. They are adaptations to a system that never learned how to feel safe in the world. Addiction then becomes the nervous system's attempt to find stability, relief, and a sense of control.
And, what we're really talking about here is what we talk about so much on the podcast, which is our development is the waters that we're swimming in as we're growing up. And that affects over and over again. It's those continuous adaptations that are happening all of the time that really shape our brain function, how our nervous system takes in sensory inputs, how our brain interprets those sensory inputs, and then the outputs that we're experiencing. It reorders our entire motivational hierarchy, and it patterns our body, brain, and nervous system to move through the world differently. And when we have complex trauma or developmental trauma, we are led into these states where we're driven more by avoiding threat than by making connection or experiencing pleasure and trying to create that safety all of the time. And something that I think is really important to touch on is that when we take away these tools that we have learned keep us safe, help us with our regulation, and we don't have other practices, somatic practices, neurosomatic tools, different ways of working with our body and our nervous system, when we haven't expanded our capacity to be able to choose a new avenue, to take a different path, then we can really end up in a bad spot where we're left with a lot of stress. There were many times through my healing journey where I would try to cold turkey take away the thing. I would try to just stop binging, or I just quit smoking cigarettes, or whatever it was. And the other protective outputs that my system then had to rely on got ramped up really intensely. I would have periods of insomnia. I would experience a lot of chronic pain. I would get really bad migraines. Like, these are all other ways that my system is like, if you aren't going to have this, and there's no other way to regulate and create safety, then I'm going to start to produce some really strong protective outputs that get you to pull back from the world, decrease the amount of stimulus coming in, move less, engage less, have less relational stress, have less work stress, because it's not safe and there's no other tool. So I think what Jen was saying about, like, you can't climb the mountain without the tools. You have to find support and practices, and not just try to expect yourself to be able to adapt really quickly to letting go of something that's been serving you for a very long time.
Wow, yes. This truly is everything. And what I see for so many people, and why they may get like 3 months, 6 months, free from their behavior or substance, and then they go back to it. And it's this repetitive cycle, because this idea of resourcing safety and resourcing support, nourishing your nervous system, over releasing is a key to relapse prevention. And I get it. Like, we so desperately want to let go. And there's such a strong healing culture around letting go of what doesn't serve you, releasing your trauma, releasing the emotions, letting it go, liberating yourself. But we know that we must build our capacity to let go. And we are not going to let go of something until we have a stable, secure sense of support and safety inside. And there's a few really powerful tools specifically for addiction recovery that I want to touch on. But I also want to note too, it's like we cognitively know we need to let this thing go. And like, what if I'm going to tell you, you can never drink water again? it's like, what happens in your body in that moment? It's like, you can never do this thing that has kept you alive and helped you survive for so many years. And so it is gently and slowly showing your body that not only do you get to survive, but you get to thrive. You get to feel safe, alive, and free. Like the opposite of addiction is aliveness, it's authenticity, it's expansion and freedom. And cognitively, we know we need to let this thing go. And I know for so many people struggling with addiction, they feel this, oh, I'm just self-sabotaging. I'm just this, I'm just ruining my life. And there's that shame, that voice of shame, but understanding it, there's no such thing as self-sabotage. It is a protective strategy and it's self-preservation. And that's what we're dealing with here. And a few things that I find have really helped people to resource. I mean, the neuro tools are everything. Somatic tools are everything. We talked about community support and co-regulation. And whether that's through a 12-step program, finding a community, a women's or a men's circle, a counselor, something structured, something that has some sort of like kind of ritualistic nature, I find is really helpful in the beginning, because we often have a lot of attachment wounding if we're having addiction, and we have fears of intimacy and connection. And so having something where it's like, I'm going in for an hour, I'm not required to talk to anyone, but I can receive, I'm in a space, we're in a circle, I'm getting support. And another key, which, I mean, Jennifer, you did it in the very beginning, like your honesty, your courage to say, this is what I'm going through. I am recovering from a cannabis dependency. Like getting honest, that just liberates so much in your system, so much freedom, so much authenticity, because when you're met with love and non-judgment, it kind of repatterns that wounding that we use the substance to soothe in the first place. And so, yeah, I know this theme of addiction sort of perpetuating a lot of it intensity, that all or nothing, black or white thinking. But another really important and nourishing tool is gentleness. I know I've talked to both of you about this. We've talked about this so much, is like, what would it be like to just like live in a more blended state, kind of like more in the middle, where we kind of approach our healing journey with the same like warrior woman archetype. And it's so beautiful. And it was probably necessary at one point when we needed that intense, quick change in the beginning. But for that lasting, sustainable, long-term thriving, gentleness, how simple can it be? Can you get to just live at ease, at peace? And so I want to emphasize, yes, somatic tools and all these things. And can you just go on a walk or be in nature or cook some soup? And these get to be healing practices. It doesn't have to be these elaborate, intense, complex things that we do to feel good every day. You can feel good just as you are. And so sometimes less is more for that long-term sustainable change. And the last thing I'll say about that is the intensity that we're meeting our healing journey with is oftentimes motivated by shame. And so when we learn to source our motivation from love, from self-love, from nourishment, I want to nourish my nervous system. I want to give my body what she didn't get to have her whole life. When it's met with love, that every healing practice I do is a pathway to more deeply love and care for myself. It's a form of somatic reparenting, of healing these attachment woundings, and from truly just giving your body what it didn't get to have. And so for me, I feel like that's key, that you could do all these certain practices, but it's the energy that you're meeting it with. So
I think we should talk about shame, because I think what Brooke brought up was something that was so resonant. Like, I understand shame. Shame is such a well-worn path. It just comes, I mean, it is just coming up and coming up and coming up. And what I realized, that shame was one of my motivators. Shame was a driver in my life. And so the cannabis being the dampener and the shame being the driver, this is a very dangerous cycle for being in. It's totally leading to inauthenticity, and the idea of being gentle. This is not something that I have really understood. I can understand it cognitively, but doing it and being it is like a whole new exploration. And so the first 4 or 5 days of being cold turkey, I mean, I cried from start to finish. I just wake up and cry and go to bed crying. And when I shared that with Elizabeth, she was like, I cried for 2 weeks when I quit drinking. So like, it's okay to do that and to feel this. And I reached out to Brooke, just checking in and like, well, I did this today, but I can't tell if I'm being productive or lazy. And Brooke's response was, give yourself some grace over the next few weeks. It's natural to want to assess your nervous system state because I am always assessing myself. I am always under my own microscope. So her wisdoms here, I think, are really relevant. It's natural to want to assess your nervous system state, but the truth is you're removing a substance from your life that has helping you regulate for years. You are going to be dysregulated. Radical self-compassion for every part of you is the key code to your liberation. I know it's not easy, but let it be simple. Lower the bar for yourself and be gentle with your body. This is a very tender time, one of the most one of the most life-changing portals you are entering. And that was such a necessary text for me to read, to receive those words about gentleness, because shame, addiction, dissociation, like these are buddies, right? Like these guys are in cahoots with each other. Like the emotional repression that precurses addiction, like these are all very loud parts of my personal story, of all of our stories. And so before a substance or a behavior can enter the picture, there is self-abandonment and dissociation. When emotions are unsafe to feel and express, the picture, I mean, especially in early developmental environments where needs were unmet or we were punished, the nervous system learns to disconnect as a survival strategy. And so over time, this internal fragmentation creates a void, a chronic state of emotional absence that needs soothing. And I'm feeling tender even hearing my own words right now and sitting with two sisters that hold my space daily. And, substances and addictive behaviors become a way to fill that void, offering momentary relief for a fleeting sense of aliveness. But beneath every addiction is often a history of silenced emotions and a body that has forgotten to feel safe within itself. And so, deep breath, because it really hits me to hear those words.
It really hits me too. And I just want to take a pause to like honor the vulnerability that you're coming to this recording with, because it is really big. Like, you guys are witnessing somebody who's created a lot of capacity in their nervous system. And it's a big deal to be able to share on a big platform in real time about what's happening. And so I honor that. I've shared on here many times before, I think, that people used to tell me all the time to be gentle with myself. And it literally made me nauseous. Like I would be like, I would have like a gag response to the thought of gentleness. It creeped me out. It made my skin crawl. I just hated it. Internally, it felt very, 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 very bad. And there was something really linked with shame there, right? Like that's also how shame feels in my body. That feeling of like, I want to rip off my skin. I feel really heavy. I feel really uncomfortable. Be gentle with yourself. Boom, shame. And uncoupling some of that has been really big. And I will say, Brooke, too, what you talked about how we approach our healing practices and not going into it with that same mindset of like, I got to do more, I got to fix myself. That driven by shame approach to healing is so important. And for a long time in my somatic journey, even when I was aware of minimum effective dose and seeing how my nervous system responded, I like couldn't stop myself from wanting to push harder, go deeper, feel more. And honestly, one of the greatest gifts for me has been working with you through my vocals for a different experience of somatics that is lighter and more playful and doesn't create that nauseous, uncomfortable feeling in me. And it's a way that I have learned to be able to express. There's so much good stuff going on neurologically with my vocal cords and my diaphragm and my vagus nerve, but it's not the same heaviness as like dropping into the body and feeling all of the things over and over again. It's a really different experience. And since we have you here, and that's such a gift, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how the voice can be such a powerful somatic portal.
Yes, thank you so much, Elizabeth, for weaving in the voice here, and Jennifer for just like sharing that message of gentleness and how my text message supported you. That makes me so happy because sometimes I don't know what's coming through, but it just does. And yeah, it's such a privilege to journey with you both and be in the space. And yeah, I mean, the voice, Elizabeth, you named it. It's like playful, it's fun. It's That's why I love working with the voice and creative expression, because it just makes something beautiful about everything you've been through. It just like hones the humanness of your lived experience into something authentic and soulful and beautiful. And it's fun, it's playful, it doesn't have to be hard or heavy. It's the voice, and the voice is an expression of the state of your nervous system. It is a portal to your subconscious inner world. So it can reach places that other things can't. And this can be through somatic toning, vocal release, sighing. It can be through singing. It could be through songwriting. I mean, there's so many different ways that you can meet your voice. Doing voice work doesn't mean you have to be a singer or be musical in any sense. Like there's so much conditioning that we can kind of strip away from that. But working with your voice is working with a medicine. It's a healing tool. It's an instrument of authenticity, of reclamation, of liberation, of calling every part of yourself back and giving a voice to the parts that you have suppressed, that you have exiled, that have told they are not safe to take up space, that they contract and constrict. And it's through the voice that you either connect or constrict from the world around you, because it is an expression of the social engagement system and that ventral vagal frequency of safety, of connection, of belonging. And people have been singing for thousands of years to pray, to heal over each other, to grieve, to come into community, and to pray on the land. And that's what we've been doing. And for some reason, over the last couple hundred years, it's become a tool for performance and people pleasing and hyper productivity. But that's not its nature. Its nature is to heal and to remind us of our inherent connectedness.
It really has been such a game changer to work with voice, because when we're talking about reaching places that other things can't, and we're talking about shame and immobilization, right? Shame is the immobilizer, but not like immobilizing, like I can't move my arms and I'm going to go work out. We're talking about the immobilization of the internal body, right? The bracing, the constriction, the impinged vagus nerve, right? Like, so our voice is actually the conductor of mobilizing our internal state. And that is huge. And when I reflect on like my early life, I was someone who hated my voice. I hated to hear my own voice. I remember having like answering machines, and I just was always so scared to leave a voice note. And it wasn't until I started mobilizing internally, and even through this podcast, well, there was just like so much belief rewiring around voice that had to change and rewire so that I could be here, for 3 seasons now. And so I hear, if you go back and listen to Old Illuminated, when Elizabeth and I first started podcasting, you will hear 2 different women on that podcast. And it really speaks volumes to the shame that we have released and worked through, and how much being in our vocals has birthed another life for us, right? Not just in this podcast, but in educational spaces and in holding spaces for others. It's a big deal to be able to connect to your own voice and to not hate it, right? Because that was self-abandonment also.
100%. And the voice is such a reflection of our nervous system state. And as I witness those changes in you and me and, in clients that I work with, you can really see new patterning happening in the body reflected through the voice. And one of the really cool things about working with the voice too is it's so non-cognitive, but it bleeds out into these very practical places in my life. Like as I really started working with my voice and doing that deep intrinsic mobilization that comes with that, I suddenly was setting boundaries in a very different way from a very different, more embodied, more regulated space. I was able to share more authentically on this podcast. I had some really difficult conversations, and it wasn't like I went back and cognitively thought, I'm going to do this differently. Let me make my strategy for this. It was like in the moment, coming from my body, the boundaries just came out. The way that I navigated through relationships was different. And my world started to change in business, in personal relationships, in relationship to myself, in my finances, like in all of these avenues that I can really root back to that work with the voice. And I'm really excited because Brooke and I did a workshop together. We've been pairing a lot of neurosomatic tools with her incredible somatic voice work to make this really beautiful blend of practices for this. And we did a workshop and it was amazing. The results were amazing, the responses, the feedback. And so we have decided that we're going to do a course, a 7-week course, combining neurosomatics and somatic vocal practices. And we would love for you all to join us. Brooke, you want to tell people how they can find out about the course?
Yeah, absolutely. They can just go to brookewolfe.com/trauma rewired, and there will be a discount code for everybody to sign up and look at what we have going on. It's going to be an incredible journey. We're going to be going through the 7 chakras each week, the energetic mapping system of the body, but we're going to be weaving in applied neurology and vocal embodiment with that. So it really is all about embodying the fullest expression of who you are in a way that feels fun and playful and really liberating. So I'm super excited to be sharing this work. I mean, I've seen people come alive for the first time in doing voice work, people that are chronically disconnected, disassociated, and a collapsed shame response just come alive and expand in their whole life and everything they do. Or women who are, chronically overwhelmed and in a state of panic, relax and be like, oh, I feel safe. I'm home. Here I am. And so, yeah, the voice just amplifies and opens everything up. And we have put just so much into this course. It's going to be really incredible. And I would love for you guys to join us. And the link will be, I'm sure, in the show notes. So
It is a really beautiful offering. And, just my only closing thought is to let people know, like, your voice, your tone, that vibration, it is the medicine. It is the medicine. So I do hope you'll join them, brookewolfe.com/trauma rewired. And just thank you both so much for holding this space with me and sharing your reflections. It's meaningful. And thank you to the listener. Thank you.
Thank you.